At dawn, the Pacific looks calm from a distance. Blue water, white spray, the kind of quiet that lies. Because in the jungle, the war doesn't announce itself with artillery first. It announces itself with a missing patrol, a rifle shot you never hear, a Marine who steps off a trail for 1 second and never comes back. In the early years of the Pacific War, the Marine Corps learned something humiliating. Discipline alone didn't keep you alive in vegetation you couldn't see through. On islands where the enemy moved like ghosts, the rules that made Marines the most disciplined force on Earth could also make them predictable. And predictable soldiers died. This story begins with a problem nobody at headquarters had a manual for, and ends with a platoon nobody wanted to claim, credited with surviving missions no unit should have survived. September 1942, Guadalcanal, Henderson Field. The air smells like wet earth and aviation fuel. Lieutenant Colonel William Wild Bill Jailing stands near the edge of the runway and watches Marines carry a stretcher toward the aid station. Then another. Then another. These aren't dramatic battlefield charges. These are patrol losses. Quiet, slow, mathematical losses. The Japanese own the jungle. They don't need to defeat Marines in open combat to win. They just need to feed on patrols, one squad at a time until the division bleeds out. The Marines are trained for aggression, movement, offense. The jungle punishes movement. Every branch snaps, every canteen clinks, every nervous step turns into a trail the enemy can read like handwriting. The pattern is consistent. Japanese snipers don't shoot the nearest man. They shoot the officer. Machine guns don't fire from the front. They wait until Marines pass and then open up from behind. A squad thinks it's advancing toward a target, but it's walking into a trap that was set 2 days earlier by men who never sleep in the same place twice. After weeks of this, the war feels less like combat and more like hunting. Marines are the prey. Whaling knows the arithmetic. At this rate, the division runs out of infantry before the Japanese run out of jungle, and that means Henderson Field falls. And if Henderson Field falls, everything changes in the Pacific. So whaling does something that will ripple through Marine doctrine for the next 80 years. Whaling is not a quiet officer. He's a World War I veteran, a marksman, a hard man with a hard reputation, and, depending on who you ask, he's either the kind of leader you want in a crisis or the kind of leader who causes one. He's been relieved from a staff role due to personality friction. In many armies, that ends a career. On Guadalcanal, it becomes an opportunity because the division chief of staff doesn't need a politician. He needs someone who can solve a jungle problem. Whaling spends days watching patrols leave and counting how many return. He doesn't romanticize it. He doesn't call it heroism. He calls it a system failure. Then he walks into a command tent with a proposal. Build a scout sniper unit. Not a big one, not a parade ground unit. A small, invisible unit. Teams of 2 and 3. Men who can stalk. Men who can sit still for hours. Men who can move through brush without turning it into a loud announcement. He doesn't ask for the best Marines. He asks for a specific kind of Marine, the rural kid who grew up hunting, the quiet one who watches more than he talks, the stubborn one who solves problems without waiting for permission. And yes, he also looks for the men who get in trouble for thinking for themselves, not cowards, not criminals, just independent. Volunteers show up, young faces, old rifles, no special gear, no official manual. Because the Marine Corps doesn't really know what a modern scout sniper program is supposed to look like yet. Whaling has to invent it. He starts with silence. He takes them into the jungle and tells them to walk 100 yards without making noise. Every man fails. Boots crack branches. Metal taps metal. Canteens rattle. Cloth scrapes bark. The jungle amplifies everything. Whaling doesn't yell. He just makes them do it again and again. Tape down anything that clicks. Wrap anything that clanks. Remove anything that betrays you. Because in this environment, courage isn't charging. Courage is restraint. Marksmanship comes next. Most Marines can shoot well on a range, but the range doesn't rain sideways. The range doesn't steam your sight picture. The range doesn't hide targets behind leaves. Whaling teaches them to read wind from vegetation, to estimate distance from terrain, to fire from awkward positions, downhill, uphill, kneeling in mud, pressed into root systems. He teaches them to stay alive after firing, because a good shot is useless if you die 30 seconds later to a grenade. The goal isn't a kill. The goal is invisibility plus lethality. The Japanese understand this already. Whaling is teaching Marines to fight like the enemy, without becoming the enemy. Then he teaches the hardest lesson: independence. Regular infantry works in squads. Orders flow down. Initiative is controlled. In the jungle, delayed decisions kill. Whaling's teams must decide, alone, whether to shoot or slip away, whether to report or sabotage, whether to stalk or retreat. The teams learn to sketch positions, track patrol routes, interpret smoke from campfires, count soldiers by sound. And when the division prepares an offensive across rivers, through brush, into hidden guns, whaling scouts go first. They bring back what regular patrols couldn't: maps, layouts, patterns. And slowly, the Marine Division stops stumbling blind. This is the first lesson of the story. Sometimes the most disciplined force in the world has to learn a new kind of discipline. Not the discipline of formation and obedience, the discipline of patience, silence, and self-control. Whaling's unit proves the concept. Small teams can change the shape of a battle. They can remove enemy observers. They can paralyze artillery. They can cut the nerve system of a defensive line. It works. It costs lives, but it saves more than it costs. And the Marine Corps remembers. Not as a neat doctrine, as a whispered template, a set of habits passed from old hands to new hands, a culture of invisible work. 2 years later, another officer reads that template and decides to twist it into something even more controversial. He doesn't want hunters. He wants fighters. He wants men who don't just endure violence. He wants men who win it. And his logic will sound insane to every officer who loves the idea of perfect Marine discipline. Because this officer will walk into a brig where the Corps locks up its own troublemakers and treat the cells like a recruiting office. He will pull out men with assault charges, men who brawl, men who disobey, men who steal, and he will claim that these are exactly the men you want if you're about to send a platoon behind enemy lines on an island called Saipan, Hawaii, early 1944. The training grounds are green and wet and alive. The 6th Marine Regiment needs a scout sniper platoon, something that can move ahead of the line, cut through enemy space, and bring back answers before the questions become casualties. First Lieutenant Frank Tachovsky, combat experienced, sharp-eyed, blunt, gets the assignment. Depending on who tells the story, he either volunteers for it or is chosen because nobody else wants it. He studies the problem the way whaling studied Guadalcanal. He looks at the Pacific and sees a simple truth. Close combat is not decided by slogans. It's decided by who adapts faster in chaos. So he asks a forbidden question: what kind of Marine adapts fastest? On paper, the answer is obvious. The most disciplined, the most obedient, the cleanest record. Tachovsky rejects that. He says discipline matters, but it isn't the same as survival. He tells skeptical officers a line that becomes a legend. When 2 Marines fight, the loser goes to sick bay. The winner goes to the brig. The Corps punishes the wrong man. Tachovsky says he wants the winners. Not because he loves crime. Because he understands a vicious reality. Behind enemy lines, there is no referee. There is no line officer giving a speech. There is only speed, violence, and nerve. Men who have already been in ugly situations and stayed standing might be the men who come back. So Tachovsky walks through the brig and looks at Marines behind bars. Assault charges, insubordination, destruction of property, fighting that went too far, brawls that ended with broken teeth and blood on concrete, the kind of records that make staff officers grind their teeth. Some Marines look ashamed, others look bored, a few look dangerous. Tachovsky doesn't lecture. He offers a deal: volunteer for a unit that will operate alone without backup in the worst terrain on Earth. High casualty probability, no glory promised, no parades, just a chance to be useful, a chance to fight the enemy instead of fighting your own temper in a cell. Some laugh, some refuse, but many volunteer because troublemakers often share one trait: they hate cages, they hate being controlled, they hate sitting still while other men decide their fate. Tachovsky selects the ones who don't beg, don't posture, and don't flinch when he explains what the job will demand. He adds a second stream: expert riflemen from line units, men who prove themselves in training and combat. The result is a strange blend: brawlers and shooters, thieves and trackers, men with clean records and men with bruised knuckles. 40 men total. Not a company, not a battalion, a knife blade. Training begins in the Hawaiian Highlands. Tachovsky borrows whaling's fundamentals: silence, fieldcraft, marksmanship, independence. Then he adds his own obsession: close quarters lethality. Because the jungle collapses distance, a fight can happen at 10 feet, at 5, at arm's length. He drills hand to hand, knife work, silent takedowns, moving as a team in the darkness. He teaches them to live off the land, to sleep in wet ground and still function, to carry less and move faster, to become the kind of unit that officers fear because it doesn't fit in a neat chain of control. And the men, being who they are, start acquiring gear. They steal, not always for greed, for function. Better boots, better rations, extra ammunition, rain gear, a can of peaches that tastes like heaven when you've been living on bland-issued food. The theft becomes so consistent that other Marines start calling them the 40 Thieves. At first it's an insult, then it becomes a nickname with teeth, because the men in this platoon are the ones you send to do the things polite units don't do. Officers complain. Supply sergeants threaten. Tachovsky listens, nods, and keeps training. Because he isn't building a parade unit. He's building something that has to survive a month of nightmares on an island where the enemy has dug into rock. Spring, 1944. The Pacific map narrows. The next objectives are not raids. They are invasions. Saipan sits in the Marianas, close enough to threaten the Japanese homeland with air power. The enemy knows what Saipan means, so they pack the island with defenses: caves, bunkers, artillery, spider holes, hidden positions that can survive bombardment and keep firing. High Command predicts brutal casualties. The first wave will die in water. The second wave will die on sand. The third wave will die in cane fields. And somewhere behind all that, the 40 Thieves will be told to do what they were built to do: slip inland while everyone else bleeds for every yard. June 15th, 1944. The ocean is crowded with ships. The sky is loud with engines. Naval guns pound the shoreline. The beach disappears under smoke and sand columns. And still, when the landing craft ramps drop, the enemy fires as if nothing happened. Mortars, machine guns, artillery. Men fall before they step onto land. The water turns into a trap. Some drown in shallow surf because the weight of gear pulls them down. It's chaos, it's screaming, it's slipping on blood-slick sand and trying not to look at the bodies because if you look too long, you stop moving. The 40 Thieves land not as heroes, but as a tool. Their mission is not to take the beach. Their mission is to go past the beach. By midday, while line companies fight for a foothold, Tachovsky's men crawl through cane fields where visibility drops to 10 feet. Every rustle could be an ambush. Every shadow could be a rifle barrel. The first kills are quiet. A lone radio operator stringing wire, a two-man observation post, a runner carrying messages. These are not cinematic duels, they are eliminations. Removing eyes, removing voices, removing coordination. The enemy's artillery becomes less precise because the men who call it in start disappearing. And the line Marines, who will never know the thieves were there, advance through gaps that exist because somebody far ahead did something dirty and silent. The thieves learn Saipan fast. Spider holes covered with leaves. Cave mouths that look like shadows until they spit bullets. Civilians in shock. Japanese patrols that move in the same routes at the same times. Tachovsky's teams map the pattern. They don't just shoot, they watch. They note where officers walk, where mess lines form, where couriers run. They begin to understand that a defensive system is a living organism. If you cut the right tendon, the whole thing limps. And every night they push deeper. Some return with intelligence. Some return with blood on their sleeves. Some don't return on time at all, and when they finally appear at dawn, they look older. If you're into these hidden, uncomfortable chapters of World War II, the stories that don't fit in neat textbooks, hit like right now. It helps this channel, WWII Hidden Chapters, reach people who actually want the full story. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications. We're digging up the parts of the war that got buried under clean slogans. Now, back to Saipan. Because the thieves are about to take a mission that even other scout units call suicide. A night infiltration toward Garapan, the shattered capital, where the Japanese still operate a living nerve center behind the front. Garapan is rubble and ghosts. Naval bombardment smashed buildings, but it didn't kill organization. Japanese soldiers move through ruins. Trucks still run. Lines of communication still exist. The thieves crawl forward under darkness, stopping every 50 yards to listen. The island is never truly quiet. There are always insects, always distant gunfire, always the wet breath of leaves. They reach the outskirts of town and spot a guarded ammunition area, concrete structures, wire, sentries. The orders, officially, are to observe and report. Tachovsky sees an opportunity. Not a heroic one, a practical one. If they can cripple ammunition, they can cripple artillery. If they can cripple artillery, they can save hundreds of Marines who will otherwise die in the next day's advance. 2 men volunteer to plant charges. The rest cover from distance. Timing is everything. Sentries pass in patterns. Shadows shift. A guard turns his head at the wrong moment and sees movement where there shouldn't be movement. A shout breaks the night. Rifles come up. The thieves open fire. Sharp, controlled, minimal. The charges go off, and then the depot goes up like a chain reaction. Secondary blasts, a rolling thunder. Orange light throwing jagged shadows across broken streets. For minutes, the Japanese aren't hunting the thieves. They're reacting to disaster. And the thieves use that chaos to vanish back into cane fields, sprinting in short bursts, dropping flat when patrols sweep by, living on nerve and training. They return to Marine lines at dawn with smoke still rising behind them. Intelligence officers stare at the report like it's an insult to their understanding of what's possible. You did what? Some believe it. Some don't. Tachovsky doesn't argue. He knows what matters. Enemy fire decreases. Not everywhere, not permanently, but enough that line Marines notice something has shifted. The Japanese respond the way disciplined defenders always respond. More patrols, more ambushes, more bait, and the thieves learn a darker truth of Saipan, one that pushes them toward a brutal private vow. Wounded men left in clearings, cries for help that draw rescuers into kill zones. The island turns personal. A thief patrol walks into an ambush and barely fights out. They return with injuries and rage. They tell stories that make even seasoned Marines go silent. The thieves meet without officers, enlisted men only. They speak in low voices. They decide something that isn't written in any manual. None of them will be taken alive. It's not bravado. It's fear turned into policy. Because behind enemy lines, capture isn't paperwork. Capture is suffering. And the thieves, being who they are, will not be used. Not as trophies, not as bait, not as examples. This is how discipline and chaos merge. A unit that breaks rules for survival creates its own rules that are harder than any official code. Days blur, 12-hour cycles, half the platoon scouts by day, half infiltrates by night. Sleep comes in fragments, food is scavenged, water is never enough. The thieves shrink from 40 to 30-something effective men. Not all dead, some wounded, evacuated, broken. The math starts again, like Guadalcanal, and Tachovsky sees the same problem Whaling saw. If this continues, the platoon burns out before the island does. But Saipan doesn't give rest. It gives new objectives. Recon a ravine, mark cave systems, identify artillery hidden under canopy, locate command posts that coordinate counterattacks. Every task is a gamble against a hidden gun. One patrol finds a cave complex that functions like a headquarters, officers, radios, maps. Too guarded to assault. They mark it and call artillery. The shells arrive like judgment. The cave mouth collapses. The radio chatter changes. Enemy coordination stutters. Marines advance. It feels like proof that this ugly method works. Small teams plus big guns. But then Saipan collects payment. Another patrol gets caught withdrawing from an artillery observation. Machine gun fire from elevation. Rifles from brush. The kill zone is perfect. Tachovsky hears about it and knows instantly. The enemy has learned their habits. The thieves are being hunted now, not just hunting. A corporal stays behind to cover his men's escape. Bar firing until the jungle swallows him. The survivors return with shaking hands and fixed stares. They report what they saw, their leader standing in the open for seconds that felt like hours, choosing to die so others live. This is the second lesson of the story. The men Tachovsky pulled from the brig are not saints, they are not clean heroes. But in combat, morality often looks like a decision made in 2 seconds under gunfire. And many of these men who couldn't behave in camp behave with terrifying clarity when death is immediate. The Corps calls them trouble. The jungle calls them useful. Late June. Intelligence whispers something ugly. The Japanese are preparing a mass banzai charge, not a raid. A desperate, suicidal storm meant to break a line through sheer force. Thousands of men, bayonets, screams. The kind of attack that turns warfare into a stampede. The Marines have seen smaller versions before. This one will be bigger. The Japanese know Saipan is slipping away. They intend to trade their lives for a chance at chaos. Command looks for ways to blunt it. Machine guns and artillery will do most of the killing, but only if the assault is disorganized when it hits. The best way to disorganize it is to remove leadership before the charge begins. That task goes to a unit designed for exactly this. Independent teams operating in enemy space at night. Tachovsky receives orders. Infiltrate the Japanese assembly areas, find command points, eliminate officers, create confusion, then get back. It's a mission with no good exit plan. Security will be heavy. Patrols will be thick. The thieves will be moving through a living sea of enemy troops. Tachovsky briefs the volunteers. He doesn't sell glory. He sells consequences. If they fail, the banzai will slam into Marine lines with more coordination, more momentum, more chance of a breakthrough. The volunteers step forward. Not because they're noble. Because they understand math, too. Midnight. Cloud cover. No moon. The best conditions you'll ever get for infiltration. The thieves split into teams, 4 men each, assigned sectors. Hand signals only. No talking, no smoking, no unnecessary movement. Each team carries a hard choice. If things go wrong, you don't call for help. You don't bring the whole enemy down on the line. You vanish or you die. They move past sleeping Japanese soldiers in foxholes, past supply stacks, past whispered conversations in a language they don't understand, but can recognize as fear. The island smells like sweat and wet soil and old smoke, and somewhere ahead are the men who will lead thousands into a screaming charge at dawn. The first officer dies quietly. A tent with lamplight, a figure bent over maps, a single shot from distance, controlled, measured. The body slumps forward. No alarm. Another team sees a group of officers gathered near a tree line, arguing in low voices, pointing. They wait until the group tightens. Then fire. 2 shots, 2 bodies. The rest scatter into darkness. The thieves don't chase. Chasing is how you die. The mission is disruption, confusion, fear, leadership removal. Over the next hours, teams strike like needles. 1 officer here, 2 there, a runner on a path, a radio operator with headphones. They're not trying to win. They're trying to break coherence. Some accounts claim a number, 17 officers, 20 officers, killed in that night's work. Exact counts blur in war. What doesn't blur is the concept. The thieves return by early light with reports of movement, assembly, nerves. And then the waiting begins. Marines reinforce positions. Machine gun crews check barrels. Artillery plots fire lanes. The line soldiers don't know what the thieves did. They just know something is coming. The air before a banzai charge is strange. Quiet in the way a room is quiet right before a fight breaks out. Men speak less. They check gear more. They stare into brush as if staring can stop what's moving toward them. July 7th, 1944, before dawn. Then it comes. A roar, a human storm. Thousands of Japanese soldiers, many wounded, many desperate, rush the Marine and Army lines, screaming, bayonets fixed, some carrying rifles, some carrying spears, some carrying nothing but momentum and death. The first collision is hand-to-hand in places, but the line is not unprepared. Machine guns open fire, artillery slams pre-plotted zones, rifles crack, men reload until their thumbs bleed. The banzai charge is terrifying not because it's tactical genius, but because it's emotional violence made into mass movement. And yet, something is wrong with it. It lacks rhythm, it lacks direction, it hits unevenly. Units charge without support. Some clusters surge too early, some too late. Communication fails. The Japanese come in waves that don't coordinate with each other. The assault becomes a flood without a current. Marines and soldiers exploit that. They concentrate fire. They hold. They bend but don't break. By morning, the ground is littered with bodies and the banzai has burned itself out. The Japanese lost thousands in hours. The line holds. And when commanders later tried to explain why the assault, so massive, so desperate, didn't achieve a breakthrough, the conversation always circles back to the same factors: firepower, preparation, terrain, and the confusion that happens when leadership and coordination are missing at the worst possible moment. Did the 40 thieves stop the banzai by themselves? No unit stops something like that alone. Firepower stops it. Prepared lines stop it. Artillery stops it. But the thieves may have done what they were ordered to do. Disrupt the brain before the muscles swing. Cut tendons. Create uncertainty. Kill the men with maps. Make the assault less than it could have been. And in war, less than it could have been is the difference between a line holding and a line collapsing. The thieves don't celebrate. They're exhausted. They're missing men. They're running on adrenaline debt. Their legend grows because other Marines love a story that proves a dirty truth. The Corps sometimes survives because someone broke the rules in the right direction. After the banzai, organized Japanese resistance on Saipan collapses into pockets, caves, ravines, holdouts. The island becomes a grim cleanup. The thieves are used for what they were built for: infiltration, marking targets, flushing positions, pulling information out of places regular units can't safely probe. Their numbers keep shrinking, but their value stays high. They operate like a scalpel in a campaign that has turned into surgery on rock. Each day they move, listen, and strike. Each night they return with dirt-stained faces and eyes that don't blink enough. The line Marines call them thieves with a kind of respect now, because they see what the thieves do. They go into places you don't want to go. Tachovsky himself becomes a strange figure in the unit's mythology. A disciplined officer who chooses undisciplined men. A man who can speak the language of staff officers while thinking like a hunter. He enforces standards that matter: noise discipline, spacing, observation, fire control, while ignoring standards that don't help survival. Clean uniforms, perfect posture, polite behavior. He doesn't make the thieves better Marines in the traditional sense. He makes them better predators. He turns aggression into method. He channels their chaos into mission, and the thieves, who always fought authority, begin to follow him not because they fear punishment, but because they've seen that his method keeps them alive longer than instinct. The war moves on. Saipan ends. The platoon returns to Hawaii or shifts into other operations, depending on the account. Some men vanish into the bureaucracy of replacement pools. Some go back to line companies. A few carry the nickname for life. The Marine Corps, being the Marine Corps, both loves and hates stories like this. It loves them because they prove toughness. It hates them because they imply the institution's rules weren't enough. Official doctrine slowly absorbs the useful parts while sanding off the embarrassing ones. Scout sniper culture grows in later campaigns. Recon evolves. Small teams operating independently behind enemy lines becomes less insane and more necessary. And the lineage always points backward to two places: Guadalcanal, where whaling improvised a template, and Saipan, where Tachovsky, according to legend, weaponized trouble. One officer built hunters from outdoorsmen, another built hunters from fighters. Both reached the same conclusion. The jungle doesn't care what your manual says. It cares whether you can move without being seen and kill without being caught. This is the third lesson. Discipline and lethality are not opposites. Sometimes, lethality requires a deeper discipline. The discipline to break a rule for a reason, not for ego. The thieves weren't lethal because they were criminals. They were lethal because their violence had direction. If you want to keep the story grounded for debate, you frame it honestly. Some details are unit law. Some are confirmed roles of scout sniper platoons. Some are reconstructed scenes. But the theme is historically believable. Elite units often recruit for traits that don't look elite on paper. Special operations in every era quietly select for stubbornness, aggression, resilience, improvisation, and a willingness to operate without comfort. The Marine Corps in 1944 didn't call it psychological selection. It called it common sense, or insanity, depending on your personality. Tachovsky's selection from the brig, whether literal or exaggerated in later retellings, represents a real wartime idea. Sometimes the men who break rules in camp obey reality better in combat. In the weeks after Saipan, men write letters home. Some never mention what happened. Some tell jokes. Some talk about weather. Some mention friends who didn't make it back. The thieves, in particular, don't always become storytellers. Many veterans carry their memories like stones, not like trophies. The story survives because it's the kind of story Marines repeat to teach a point. The Corps is disciplined. Yes, but it's also adaptable when it has to be. And adaptation is often led by officers who are willing to be disliked. Whaling was disliked by some. Tachovsky was certainly questioned. But both solved problems that killed Marines when left unsolved. Now imagine you're a staff officer in 1944, reading a report that says a platoon infiltrated enemy space, operated without support, killed key personnel, returned with intelligence, and materially reduced enemy effectiveness. Then imagine the report adds, half these men came from disciplinary trouble. The instinct is to reject it, to say it can't be true because it violates moral order. Armies love moral order. Moral order keeps millions of men functioning. But war itself is disorder. War punishes the neat. War rewards the adaptive. That contradiction is why stories like this survive. They're uncomfortable. They argue with the institution's self-image. They force debate. And for your video, that's exactly what you said you want. Material that invites argument. So here's the argument, stated plainly. Did Tachovsky make the Corps stronger by recruiting troublemakers, or did he gamble with discipline and simply get lucky? Some viewers will say luck. Some will say selection. Some will say the story is myth. Others will say myth grows from truth. But the battlefield outcome doesn't care about the argument. The battlefield cares about whether someone solved the tactical problem. On Saipan, the tactical problem was this. How do you stop an enemy who lives underground and in vegetation and chooses the time of contact? The answer, again, is not a slogan. It's small teams. Quiet movement, independent decisions, and the moral complexity of choosing men for what they can do, not what their records say. The thieves also show something else. A unit can be undisciplined in garrison and hyper-disciplined in the field. Combat discipline is not the same as peacetime discipline. Combat discipline is spacing, fire control, noise control, observation, restraint. A thief who steals a can of food might still hold a position under fire without flinching. A brawler who punches a sergeant might still crawl through mud for hours without making a sound. The Marine Corps is a culture that tries to make one kind of discipline cover everything. This story suggests two kinds exist, and sometimes, when survival is on the line, the Corps quietly prioritizes the second kind. When you tell it as a 60-minute narrative, you're not just telling cool stuff happened. You're guiding the viewer through evolution. Guadalcanal. Marines are hunted. Whaling builds hunters. Hawaii. The template spreads. Tachovsky twists it. Saipan. The island forces a test. The banzai. Mass violence collides with prepared defense and disrupted leadership. Aftermath. Doctrine absorbs the lesson. That structure is why this story works. It's not random action. It's cause and effect, a chain of adaptation. And your channel style, they were all wrong, fits perfectly because the wrong is the assumption that discipline equals lethality. In the end, the 40 thieves are a mirror the Marine Corps doesn't always want to look into. They reflect a hidden truth. Sometimes the men who don't fit the system are exactly the men the system needs when the environment becomes impossible. That doesn't mean every troublemaker is a hero. It means selection matters. It means leadership matters. It means channeling matters. Without Tachovsky, 40 wild men are just 40 problems. With Tachovsky, they become a blade. And without whaling, there may be no template at all, no proof that invisible teams can change the geometry of a Pacific battle. And there's one more layer, the enemy. Japanese defenders on Saipan weren't fools. They were experienced. They were entrenched. They were desperate. They adapted too. They used ambushes. They used bait. They increased patrols. They hunted the hunters. That's why this story never becomes a simple American triumph. It stays tense. It stays dangerous. The thieves succeed not because the enemy is weak, but because they were built for the exact kind of lethal chess match that jungle war becomes. And even then, they lose men. They bleed. They break. They survive because survival sometimes is just the art of lasting one more night than the other side. If you want, you can emphasize this near the end. The Marine Corps didn't become more lethal by becoming less disciplined. It became more lethal by realizing discipline is a tool, not a religion. Whaling disciplined men into silence. Tachovsky disciplined chaos into purpose. Both forms are discipline. Both are control. Both are hard. The difference is what they control. The parade ground controls appearance. The jungle controls sound, movement, fear. And the men who can control fear in a 10-foot ambush are more valuable than men who can control their uniform creases. After Saipan, the war continues to Tinian, Guam, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Recon and scout sniper concepts evolve. Techniques spread. Officers trade notes. Some write official reports. Some keep it oral, passed in whispered lessons. Don't skyline yourself. Don't rush a cave mouth. Don't fire twice from the same spot. If you have to cross open ground, do it like you're already being watched. These are not quotes from posters. They are rules written in loss. And stories like the 40 Thieves become the dramatic way Marines remember those rules, because humans remember stories better than bullet points. The final image of this chapter isn't the banzai charge itself. It's a quieter image, a night patrol returning. 8 men becoming 6, 6 becoming 5. 5 stumbling into friendly lines at dawn with a scrap of paper, a rough sketch, a captured code, or just a whispered warning. They're moving. That is what keeps men alive in war. Information delivered by exhausted humans who operated in places they shouldn't have survived. The thieves were a symbol of that, imperfect men doing perfect work when it mattered. And if you want the debate hook for your audience, you end with questions. Did Tachovsky's approach prove discipline is overrated? Or did it prove discipline must be redefined for different kinds of war? Were the 40 Thieves unique? Or were they simply the first time the Marine Corps admitted that personality flaws can hide combat advantages? And if that's true, what does it mean for how militaries select elite units today? Those questions keep the comments alive, because the story isn't just what happened, it's what it means. There are always risks in telling stories that include brig recruiting. Some viewers will romanticize violence. Some will misunderstand the point. Your narration can steer them, emphasize leadership, channeling, and the cost. Emphasize that these men weren't praised for being thieves. They were tolerated because they delivered results under impossible conditions. That keeps the story sharp instead of childish. It also keeps it credible, because the Marine Corps, historically, is not sentimental about undisciplined behavior. If it tolerated something, it was because something else, combat effectiveness, was at stake. Then you land the emotional core. The men who survived didn't come home as legends inside themselves. They came home as men with memories they didn't ask for. A nickname might outlive the truth. A dramatic line might replace complex reality. But the core remains. Somewhere on Saipan, in cane fields and ravines, small teams moved ahead of the line and changed what happened to thousands of Marines and soldiers behind them. Whether every detail is perfectly recorded or partially mythologized, the function of the story is the same. It teaches that the war was won not only by the visible hammer of divisions, but by the invisible needle of a few men who walked into darkness and came back. And that's why this story belongs in WWII. Hidden chapters. Because it's not comfortable. It doesn't fit clean propaganda. It's about the messy relationship between order and survival. It's about a disciplined institution borrowing strength from its outcasts. It's about officers willing to be judged by results rather than paperwork. And it's about an island battle where the enemy's final desperate charge collided with prepared defense, and perhaps with a disrupted leadership structure that made that charge less coordinated than it could have been. In many wars, the famous heroes are the ones who did brave things in daylight. This story is about men who did necessary things in darkness. Invisibility rarely gets medals. Quiet work rarely gets headlines. But quiet work keeps lines from collapsing. And if you zoom out, the Pacific War is full of this. Scouts who found guns, code breakers who found patterns, engineers who opened paths, medics who kept blood inside bodies long enough for men to live. The 40 Thieves are one extreme edge of that world, an edge that makes for a perfect argument. Were they a genius solution or a dangerous precedent? Either way, their existence says something blunt. The Marine Corps was willing to experiment when the enemy forced it to. Whaling experimented because patrols were dying. Tachovsky experimented because islands like Saipan demanded more than textbook infantry. In that sense, the 40 Thieves are not a freak accident. They are a symptom of adaptation. When institutions face existential pressure, they become flexible. When pressure fades, they become rigid again. That cycle repeats in history. And the stories that survive are usually the ones from the pressure moments, when survival forced people to do what would normally be unacceptable. So when you tell this story, you're not just narrating a marine legend. You're telling a lesson about human selection under stress, about how rules can be both protection and prison, about how the best soldiers in one environment can be the worst in another, and about how a unit's discipline isn't one thing. It's a bundle of behaviors, some useful in camp, some useful in hell. Tachovsky picked men who were bad at one kind and taught them another. Whaling picked men who already had the second kind and gave them a structure. Both approaches met the same enemy, a jungle and an entrenched defender that punished predictability. If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of viewer we build WWII hidden chapters for. Please hit like. It's the simplest way to tell YouTube this story matters. Subscribe if you want more chapters like this, and drop a comment. Do you think Tachovsky's brig recruiting was genius or reckless? And tell us where you're watching from. Our community is global, and these stories deserve a global audience. Because if we don't keep telling them, they disappear. Not just the famous battles, the strange, uncomfortable innovations, the ugly arguments, the moments when a lieutenant looked at a brig full of troublemakers and saw a weapon the Corps didn't know it had, the moment when a jungle forced Marines to become invisible, the moment when thousands screamed and charged and died in hours, and the line held because of firepower, preparation, and the unseen work done the night before. History is not just dates, it's decisions. And the most important decisions are often the ones made by people who were told they were wrong.